At the family reunion, my sister leaned across the patio table, locked eyes with me, and said, "She still thinks she's worth something." My cousin Damon didn't even look up from his plate. He just laughed and said, "She should be grateful we let her in." I turned toward my mother, hoping, just hoping, for some flicker of defense. But she didn't blink. She said, "She's a guest." Nothing more. I smiled. I smiled because I'd learned that crying in front of them made things worse. I smiled because I wanted my daughter to see me hold it together. But before I could say a word, Nova, my 7-year-old daughter, stood up, pushed her little chair back with a scrape, and said in a loud, clear voice, "We own this house." Everyone froze. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died in their throats. The air shifted like a storm had passed through it. And just like that, the entire dynamic flipped. My name is Layla. I'm 34, a single mother, and until recently I thought I had made peace with being the outcast in my own family. 3 months ago, I moved back into my grandparents' old house, the one tucked at the end of Willow Bend Lane, surrounded by tall pines and thick silence. It had been empty since Grandpa Ezra passed away last spring. Everyone assumed my mother would take it over, or maybe my uncle. No one thought of me. But Grandpa did. Before he died, he left me the house in a handwritten will, quietly, almost secretly, just like he had always treated me, with quiet, deliberate care. When I opened that envelope, I cried harder than I had in years. Not because of the house, but because someone finally believed I deserved something of my own. My daughter Nova and I packed everything we owned into a used SUV and drove across 2 states to start fresh. I thought the distance might dull the edge of everything we'd been through, my failed marriage, the judgment from my family, the feeling that no matter what I did, I was always falling short. I had dropped out of law school 10 years ago to raise Nova. I'd been pregnant, terrified, and in love with a man my family hated. When I married him, they said I had thrown my life away. When he left me 3 years later, they called it predictable. My sister Rhea didn't even hide her contempt. My mother, Celeste, told people I was going through something as if I had a temporary disease. They all moved on and I stopped trying to explain myself. But now, this house, my grandfather's house, was ours. It was run down but full of memories. Nova and I scrubbed floors, painted walls, and restored furniture that had belonged to my grandmother. Every day she would ask, "Mommy, can I keep this?" And every time I said yes, I saw her light up. She called it our castle. I called it a chance. When the reunion invitation came from my mother, I hesitated. I read it twice. It wasn't warm or sentimental. It was a generic group text sent to everyone. Still, it felt like an opportunity. Maybe being the new homeowner had changed something. Maybe they were reaching out. I wanted Nova to have cousins, family dinners, laughter in the backyard. I wanted her to feel like she belonged somewhere. I packed her favorite dress, baked a peach cobbler, and told myself to expect nothing but be open to anything. The morning of the reunion, I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, brushing my hair, smoothing down my dress, and repeating in my head, "You have every right to be here. You have every right to exist in this space." It sounds silly, but when you've been told you're less than for so long, showing up feels like a form of defiance. Nova came downstairs twirling, holding her stuffed cat by the tail. "Do I look fancy?" she asked. "You look perfect," I said. "Remember, just smile, be polite, and let Mommy handle the grown-ups." She nodded, then whispered, "But if they're mean, I'm saying something." I laughed. "Only if absolutely necessary, deal." Deal. People started arriving around noon. The backyard filled with voices and folding chairs, barbecue smoke and store-bought potato salad. I greeted everyone with a smile, hugged people who barely touched my back, and bit my tongue when Rhea said, "Oh wow, Layla, you actually dressed up. That's new." Damon gave me a nod like I was a stranger. My uncle made a joke about me being back from the wilderness. My mother kissed my cheek, then asked if I could take out the trash bags that were piling up in the kitchen. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and did it. Nova stayed close. She watched everything. She's observant in a way most adults aren't. She notices tone, body language, shifts in energy. I saw her trying to understand why people were so cold without saying anything directly. I saw her trying to make sense of how family could feel like a room full of strangers. When the food was served and everyone found their seats, I sat beside Nova, quietly grateful she was there. Without her, I don't think I would have lasted an hour. That's when the conversation started to turn. They were laughing about childhood stories, talking about who inherited what. Then someone brought up the house, and I felt it, the shift, like they were circling something. I should have known then what was coming, but I wanted so badly to believe that this time might be different, that maybe they had changed. I was wrong. It started small, the way it always does with my family. Not loud, not direct, just a tone, a glance, a question with teeth hidden behind a smile. We had finished eating and the kids were running around the yard, faces sticky from popsicles. The adults sat in a loose circle of lawn chairs. My cousin Damon tossed a football to his son while talking over his shoulder to Rhea. My mother sat across from me, sipping her wine, eyes scanning everything like she was judging a contest only she knew the rules to. I was quiet, not withdrawn, just careful. I smiled when I was spoken to. I thanked my uncle when he offered to refill my drink. I laughed when someone told an old story about my grandfather's obsession with crossword puzzles. I was trying. Not for them, really, but for Nova, who kept sneaking glances at me to see how I was doing. Then Rhea said, "So Layla, how long are you staying here? Or is this just temporary until you find something smaller?" She said it lightly, casually, like she didn't already know the answer. Before I could respond, Damon added, "Yeah, you must be saving up for a place, right?" "That's smart. Start here. Work your way up." There was a pause, and I realized what this was. They weren't asking. They were assuming. Assuming I had landed here because I had nowhere else to go. Assuming I didn't belong. I smiled and said, "Actually, Nova and I live here now. This is our home." My mother cleared her throat. "Well, it's still Ezra's house to me." That stung. She didn't say it to be nostalgic. She said it to put me in my place. I looked at her, searching for some warmth, but her face was blank, not cruel, just cold. Rhea leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, I still remember how mad Grandpa was when you dropped out of law school. He wanted better for you." Damon chuckled. "He probably rolled over in his grave when he found out you were back here." I could feel the blood rushing to my face. Nova was sitting beside me on a folding chair, legs swinging, her small fingers picking at a plastic cup. I reached for her hand under the table, gave it a squeeze. Then my mother spoke again. "We're just glad you came. It's been so long. You're a guest, and guests are always welcome." A guest. That word settled over the group like a layer of frost. Rhea nodded in agreement. Damon didn't say anything this time, but I saw the smirk on his face. I sat there, pretending that word didn't cut through me. Guest. Not daughter, not family. Guest. Like I didn't belong, even here, in the home where I had spent every summer as a child. The place where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I used to fall asleep on the porch swing while my grandmother read to me. I looked at Nova. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her eyebrows were pulled together, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was listening, really listening, the way kids do when they realize something important is happening. Someone made a joke to break the tension. My uncle said, "Let's be real, Layla still thinks she's worth something." He laughed like it was harmless, like it was funny. Damon leaned in and added, "She should be grateful we let her in." I waited for someone to speak up, for anyone to say, "That's enough." But no one did. I looked around at the faces of the people I had once loved without question. People who had watched me grow up. People who knew how hard things had been and didn't care. And in that moment, I realized they didn't see me at all. Not as a woman, not as a mother, not even as a human being. I was a mistake they had tolerated. Disappointment they could mock without guilt. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and looked down at Nova. She met my eyes, and I could see something shift in her too. She was too young to understand inheritance laws or family dynamics, but she understood something was wrong. She knew her mother was being insulted, and she was not okay with it. What happened next didn't come from me, it came from her, and it changed everything. I didn't plan to speak. I had already decided to let it go, to absorb the cruelty in silence like I always had. That had become my habit. Survive the moment, keep the peace, get through the day. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want Nova to see me lose control, but she had already seen everything. Nova shifted in her seat beside me. Her legs stopped swinging. Her fingers let go of the cup she'd been fidgeting with. She sat up straighter and turned her face toward the circle of adults, her gaze calm and serious. She didn't look at me first. She looked at my mother. Then she looked at Rhea, then at Damon. There was something in her eyes that stopped me cold. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. Then, in the middle of a lull in the conversation, she stood up. Her little dress caught the breeze, and her sneakers made a soft sound on the wooden deck as she stepped forward. No one noticed at first. The adults were still talking, laughing, refilling drinks. But she didn't wait to be seen. She raised her voice, not yelling, just steady and sure, and said, "We own this house." That was all it took. The sound of a beer can cracking open stopped mid-snap. A fork clinked against a plate. Heads turned. I froze. Nova didn't move. She stood with her hands by her sides, chin lifted. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even angry. She was just stating a fact. Damon let out a short laugh, like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "What did she say?" Nova repeated herself louder this time. "We own this house. Me and Mommy." Rhea blinked. "Excuse me." Nova turned to her. "You said my mom should be lucky you let her in, but we didn't ask you to let us in. This is our house. Grandpa gave it to Mommy before he died." You could hear the wind moving through the trees. No one spoke. I stood slowly, my heartbeat slamming in my chest. I placed a hand on Nova's shoulder, unsure whether to pull her back or let her keep going. She looked up at me, just briefly, then turned her attention back to the group. "Mommy didn't say anything because she's nice. But you were being mean. You shouldn't talk to her like that." Celeste set down her wine glass. "Layla, we don't speak that way to adults, especially not at family gatherings." Nova didn't flinch. "Then maybe adults shouldn't speak that way to my mom." I felt something inside me shift, like a knot I'd been carrying for years had started to loosen. My daughter was saying the things I had never been able to say. I took a breath and stepped forward, standing beside her now instead of behind her. "She's right," I said. My voice was even. "I haven't said anything because I thought maybe I could prove myself quietly, that if I smiled and helped and stayed small, you'd let me belong again. But that's not what this is about." I turned to face them fully. I didn't just move back here. Grandpa gave me this house. He left it to me, legally, quietly, intentionally, because he saw me, because he believed in me when no one else did. Rhea crossed her arms. "That's not possible. He never said anything." "I didn't ask him to," I said, "and I didn't owe anyone an explanation. You all assumed I was desperate, that I had nowhere else to go. You laughed at me while eating on the porch of a house you didn't know you didn't own." Damon scoffed. "You think just because you've got a piece of paper—" "I have more than a piece of paper," I said. "I have proof. The deed is in my name. I found the will. It's notarized. It's legal. I've already had it processed." That silenced them. Celeste's lips parted like she might object, but no words came. I looked down at Nova. She was still standing, still strong. I reached for her hand and held it tightly. I wanted this day to be about family, about healing. But if this is what family means to you, humiliation, disrespect, erasure, then I'm done trying to earn your kindness. Nova squeezed my hand. Her voice was small now, but unshaken. "You don't need them, Mommy." And in that moment, I knew she was right. No one moved. Nova was still standing beside me, her small hand curled around mine. Her words still hung in the air, stronger than anything I could have said. I watched my mother blink slowly, her expression unreadable for the first time all afternoon. Rhea shifted in her seat, folding and unfolding her arms like she couldn't find a comfortable place for them. Damon looked off toward the trees, jaw tight, lips pressed together. The silence felt heavier than anything they had said. Finally, my uncle spoke. "If that's true, why didn't you say anything before?" His voice wasn't angry. It was confused, like he was trying to fit this version of me into the box they had all kept me in for so long. I looked him in the eye, because I didn't think I had to announce my worth to be treated with respect. Rhea scoffed. So you're just going to throw it in our faces now, use a child to do it? Nova didn't let go of my hand. She looked straight at Rhea. You were being mean. I didn't want Mommy to cry again. My throat tightened. That last word hit harder than all the ones before it. Again? I hadn't realized she'd seen me crying late at night, in the kitchen, in the car, in the bathroom with the door closed. I thought I had hidden it. I thought I had been strong enough, but children always know. They hear what we don't say. I turned to Rhea. This isn't about showing off. It's about finally being done with being small. I've spent years shrinking myself, so none of you would feel uncomfortable. I let you make jokes about my life. I stayed quiet when you insulted my choices, my motherhood, even my presence. I paused, scanning every face in front of me. But I'm not doing that anymore. Grandpa gave me this house because he saw something in me none of you ever did. He told me once that I had my grandmother's fire and that it scared people who only knew how to control. Celeste finally spoke. He didn't mean for you to isolate yourself. I'm not isolated. I'm free. There's a difference. I stepped away from Nova and walked inside. I left the door open so they could all see me disappear for a moment into the front hallway, where I kept the framed will tucked behind a row of photo albums on the bookshelf. It had felt too personal to display, too much like proof I never wanted to need, but now it felt necessary. I returned to the porch and placed the frame on the table in the center of the circle. Here it is, his signature, the notary stamp. My name. He left this place to me, not because I asked, not because I earned it in your eyes, but because he loved me enough, believe I'd protect it. No one moved to pick it up. Damon leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. So what? We're just supposed to treat you like you're better than us now? I shook my head. Number. But you're going to treat me like I belong, because I do. The wind picked up again. Leaves rustled. Nova sat back down and rested her head against my arm. Her body relaxed like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. My mother looked at her, then at me. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I didn't know, she said finally. You didn't ask, I replied. That was the difference. I would have told her. I would have shared every step, every letter, every legal form. I wanted to, but no one ever asked. They just decided who I was supposed to be and left no room for who I really was. The energy shifted. It didn't soften completely, but something cracked. My uncle stood and walked toward the cooler, mumbling something about grabbing a drink. Rhea picked at the hem of her sleeve. Damon started a new conversation with someone across the lawn, his voice forced and too loud. The circle broke apart, scattered by discomfort. Only my mother stayed seated. She stared at the framed will like it held answers she wasn't ready to read. I didn't need anything more from her. I had said what I needed to say. More importantly, I had let Nova say what I was too scared to say for far too long. She had protected me, and in doing so, she helped me remember how to protect myself. The reunion didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or a round of apologies. It ended the way most uncomfortable truths do, with distance. People drifted away from the patio in small groups. No one made eye contact as they gathered their things. Paper plates were stacked. Leftovers were quietly wrapped in foil. The cousins said goodbye to each other, but avoided me and Nova. I didn't chase anyone down. I didn't try to salvage what was never whole to begin with. I just stood there, beside my daughter, and watched them leave the house they thought they still had control over. My mother was the last to rise. She held the framed will in her hands like it weighed more than glass and paper should. She finally looked at me, and for the first time in years, her face showed something I hadn't seen from her in a long time. Not pity, not judgment, something closer to recognition. I wish he had told me, she said. He didn't have to, I answered. She nodded, gave a short, stiff goodbye to Nova, then left without another word. I closed the front door behind them and locked it. Not out of anger, but to claim something, to make it real. This was my home now. Not a temporary shelter, not a secret, not a borrowed space. Later that night, I tucked Nova into bed in her small room filled with books, stuffed animals, and string lights. She pulled her blanket up to her chin and looked at me with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Are you mad that I said something?" she asked. I sat down on the edge of her bed and shook my head. Number, I'm proud of you. I just didn't want them to hurt you again. My chest tightened. I brushed her hair away from her forehead. You're not supposed to protect me, baby. That's my job. She stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, then whispered, but I didn't like the way they looked at you. Like you were nobody. I kissed her forehead. You saw the truth, and you stood up for it. That's one of the bravest things a person can do. She smiled softly and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. I sat there beside her for a while, listening to her breathing, the kind of peace that fills a room after a storm settled into the walls. I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel small. I felt still, rooted. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of the living room, holding the will in my hands. I thought about my grandfather, about all the times he'd pulled me aside, away from the noise of the family, and talked to me like I mattered. He never said much, but when he looked at me, I felt seen. I wondered if he knew what kind of war this house would stir up. I wondered if he'd imagined this moment, me standing here, not as the family failure, but as the rightful owner of his legacy. I placed the frame on the fireplace mantel, not to prove anything, but because it belonged there. The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes. Nova danced around the kitchen to music playing from my phone. The house was quiet, warm, and ours. No one could take that from us. I didn't expect forgiveness from my family. I didn't expect a sudden change. People don't shift overnight. But I stopped waiting for their permission to feel like I belonged. I stopped hoping that kindness would win them over. I stopped holding my breath. I learned that silence isn't always strength. Sometimes silence is surrender, and I've surrendered too much in my life. That ended when Nova stood up and told the truth without fear. She reminded me of who I used to be, of the girl who wanted to speak but never felt safe enough to do it. She gave that girl back to me. I don't know what my family will say about me the next time they gather without me. Maybe they'll say I was dramatic. Maybe they'll say I overreacted. But I won't hear it. I won't be in the room. And I don't need to be. Because I'm building something better. Not just a home, but a legacy of my own. A new kind of family. One that starts with truth, with love, and with a little girl who refused to stay quiet. If you felt something during this story, if it reminded you of moments when you had to reclaim your voice, or when someone stood up for you when you couldn't, then I hope you'll carry that strength with you today. Sometimes it's not about winning an argument. Sometimes it's about standing your ground and choosing not to shrink, even when it's family, especially when it's family. If this story meant something to you, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts or your own story. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more true stories that speak to the quiet strength we all carry inside us. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.